exactly. So as far as the trending tip of the week, what we want to go over this week is the three county record types. We want to talk about how as tax sale investors really research these tax sale properties, and 80–90% of the research that we do is going to be held on the county websites.
Yeah, that's always going to be where we get the most accurate information. It's the primary source of all of our information, and, what we're gathering about the property. And so, yeah, there are a couple of different types of records that we generally access, and those records are usually either the treasurer or the tax collector. And usually those records are related to things like the payment of taxes, assessor records, which are all related to the property assessment and how it's valued. And so the assessment records are incredibly relevant and valuable to us. Then we also access the recorders or the clerk's records. Sometimes, these are called official records or legal records. You could refer to them to basically the same office that records deeds is the same office we're going to be looking at.
Yeah, exactly. So we're going to break down each one of these offices and talk a little bit about them tonight, starting with the treasurer. It could be called the treasurer, it could be called the tax collector. In some states, it could be called the tax claim office. But whoever's in charge of collecting the property taxes is usually going to be the treasurer tax collector. That same office, not always is the case, but that same office many times is also going to be in charge of the tax sale. So even in some states that are tax lien states, obviously the tax collector, but even in tax deed states, it could still be the treasurer, the treasurer or tax collector that's actually holding the tax deed auctions.
Yeah, in fact, it's almost always going to be a good idea to go into the tax history of the property, because that is going to show you essentially, what's been paid and what hasn't been paid. That's really where we can determine what the true roll up of the property is. So what the two, how much has not been paid here in delinquent taxes that the county's trying to get. And so, yeah, it's very important there when we're looking at the tax records so that we can see which years were actually paid and which years weren't paid. That's ultimately what's going to cost with the property is a lot of past due taxes that are owed. Which with tax liens we call roll up. With deeds, we just see a deed that has a crazy high opening bid compared to its value. To the point where some can be upside down; they're not worth bidding on.
Yeah, exactly. And so when we're talking about tax lien investing in particular, the tax collector records are going to be real important, because with the tax deed, just like Shade mentioned, that opening bid amount is going to be all the delinquent taxes. So except for maybe going to the treasurer's office to get the tax sale list and the tax sale information, we're going to be using the tax collector to find out things about the property. In fact, on that slide that we were just looking at, it had information there about different liens. And so you can see some of the history of the certificates from different years past and how much we're gaining interest. And so when Shade was talking about the roll up, really that's where we can find out if there is any additional back taxes, because if we do the foreclosure, if we end up going through the foreclosure process, we're going to be in charge of paying all of those delinquent taxes off.
Yeah, really, whether we're looking at liens or deeds, it's important for us to know, what has happened with historically with the taxes on the property, because, there's generally going to be money that's outstanding or that's owed on it. And so, yeah, the tax payment history is really important. The assessment records are, in most cases now are linked directly to the online auctions or, to the lists. And so it makes it relatively easy. You can just click on a link to, pull up all the information about the property, and you don't really have to go in and use parcel search tools so much. But we still do that all the time. We use parcel search tools to plug in the information. And generally, the fastest way to find things like the assessor's the parcel search tool in the assessor's website is usually with just a basic search engine. If you type in the county name and the assessor, we can usually pull it right up, and from there we can usually pull up not only the information related to how the property is valued, but also the mapping. That's where all the mapping is attached. And the sales history of the property, is attached to it. Usually, there's a lot of really valuable information here.
Yeah, like Shay talked about with the parcel search tool, many times it could be connected to the record. If not, then we'll find that tool and look up it using the parcel number. But really, the assessor records is where we're going to make a determination if we're going to move on to this to the in our research or not. In fact, in our stages of due diligence, we teach our members 3 stages of due diligence, and in stage one of the first steps is going to the assessor record because as we review that, Shade already talked about how we're going to see stuff like the sales information. We're also going to have an idea of the assessed value, the location, the breakup of the value, if it's land value or improvement value, how many bedrooms, how many baths, if it's a structure, when it was built, how many square feet, and the size of the lot. All of that information, including links to many times the GIS maps, are going to be connected to the county assessor's records.
Yeah, in fact, we kind of treat due diligence, we do it in kind of waves or in cycles because the whole idea here is not to waste a lot of time. It's to try to save yourself time. And so, you try to weed out properties where you can and not invest a lot of time into them until you're sure that they're going to work. And so it's one of the reasons why pulling up, property records and the actual property assessment is so valuable. It's because the information alone from the property assessment is usually enough to tell us whether we have the potential for a deal or not. Now information like, for instance, if we could pull up the tax rate, the tax collector information, and it could basically put a damper on all of this information that we see here. But if we can determine the information here about the property, we can figure out if there's a deal possible.
Yeah, as you guys can see, we're going to have a ton of information here. The address listed there, the book and page number, the last time it was sold. Then we'll get into the ownership information and the sales information. In fact, when we go do our recorder search and search the legal records, that's really where we're going to be taking the names and information. So if we were to decide that we were interested in this property, we would have to research that owner's name. We can see that this particular property is a condominium, about 1,000 square feet. Had a value of around 67,000. So it's a small condo. We've got an idea of when it was built in 1972, and 2 bedroom, 2 bath.
Yeah, and essentially, and we can also learn more information about it as we want. Like we can click on links to get maps, and the maps, the GIS maps alone are kind of a whole area that we use for is to gain information about the property. The GIS mapping is going to tell us where it's physically located at, make sure it's accessible by public streets, let us know what the boundaries are for the property, and in a lot of cases there are tools that are built into a lot of the GIS systems now, like sales, like sales tools, are built into these now, so that you can look through a GIS county map and you can click on one of the layers in it, and you can pull up all of the sales for 2023 and all the sales from 2022 and 2021, and so that it makes it a lot easier, especially if you're doing something like let's say you're trying to find comps for land. That can be very helpful, when you're looking for something like that. Or, in fact, the GIS records have really something that's probably changed the most over the last, 10 or 20 years. Before GIS maps with plat maps, it was a nightmare because you had to try to figure it out, and you couldn't always be sure. With the GIS mapping, we can learn quite a bit more about the property, and they usually attach everything else to it as well.
Yeah, exactly. Shade talked about how we can use them to figure out price values, but we can also use them because they may have floodplains overlays and topographical maps. In fact, we've saved ourselves from doing bad deals because a lot of times we're not going to send somebody out to take a photo of a piece of land that we're going to be buying by using the topographical map, where looking at the overhead, it may look like there's not that much of an incline, but as we look at the topographical map, we can see no, actually it's rising in elevation by quite a bit, which really is going to make it maybe unbuildable. And so just by using the topographical map has saved us from doing bad deals versus a good deal.
Yeah, absolutely, it has. In fact, it's a good idea to look at, especially if you're in an area that has some terrain to it. If it's not very flat, if it's got hills to it, it's a really good idea to pull up a topographical map so you can figure out what kind of elevation changes you're looking at. But The third kind of record here, the recorder or the clerk's records, so they could be referred to maybe as official records or legal records. Um, this tends to be the last thing that we search, because this is after we've already determined that the property can work and the numbers are there. It's when we're trying to make sure there aren't any additional risks that are there with the property, liens that might be attached to it, or other things, mortgage or judgment, or if it can also tell us quite a bit about the history of the property as we're going through this process as well. But the way we do that is by digging into the deeds a little bit, and the ownership history of the property itself. And so when we go into the recorder's records, or the clerk's records, we can generally see uh, everything related to the property and what's happened to it. So we can usually see exactly how it got to where it is.
Yeah, really, we're going to be using the assessor records to help us pull up the recorder or clerk's records. Because what we're looking for is for any type of government lien that could survive the foreclosure. We know that tax sale properties go through a judicial foreclosure, and in that judicial foreclosure, things like mortgages, judgments are erased from the property. But what can stick are those government issued liens. And so when we're talking about government issued liens, there's really three major types. There's some other types that in certain states could stick. First one being an IRS lien. With an IRS lien, it's more of a waiting period. It's not like a state or a city lien. Essentially, we have to fill out a notification letting the IRS know we bought the property. They have 120 days to either redeem it, meaning pay us off what we owe, pay us off what we paid and take ownership, or release the lien. In most cases, we found that they'll go ahead and release the lien. The second type is state liens. They can um, stick to the property as well, but the most common type, and Shade will get into them a little bit, is going to be some type of local municipality, whether that be city or county.
Yeah, and also one thing that's kind of nice is that there are some counties that will actually send out the IRS notices before they do the auctions. And so, by the time the auctions happen, it's already been, a set time period there. And in fact, in some cases that they can get them cleared. That's one nice thing is with IRS liens, we don't have to pay it. That's one good thing, is when we see that it's not an amount we're ever going to have to pay. It's just it's just a matter of whether or not they're going to take the property. State liens, though, we do see in some cases, it kind of depends on the state. Some states have things like income tax, that they could issue liens for. We've seen that, but again, not always necessarily against properties. Um, we can find those types of liens, though. But by far, the most common thing that we come across, though, are liens that are issued against the property because it's a mess, or because they have to cut the grass, or because there's junk or stuff laying there, or because the building or the structures no longer meets code. If it no longer meets code, like for instance, if a property is deemed unsafe and is condemned, well, that's it's a legal process that it goes through to deem the property as an unsafe structure, and that they need to make sure nobody goes into it, and which is a step before they go through the process to tear it down, which is another one of the liens I listed here, demolition lien. A demo lien, if you see liens that are for large amounts, 12, 15,000, $20,000, a lot of times what we're looking at are the buildup of multiple years of taxes and something like a demolition lien against a property. And best way to prove that out is when you go there and you look and see that they have improvement value there, but the home's no longer there. Or you can see that the remnants of what used to be a lot, and sometimes we can even see exactly when they took it down.
Yeah, yeah, exactly right. I mean, with the county or a city or a nuisance type lien, that's going to always be connected to the property. They're going to be using the property as collateral. With something like a state lien, depending on the state, they may or may not attach the property to the lien. But with a county or a city type lien, those are always going to be using the property as collateral for that lien and attaching that property using the legal description to that specific lien. So how do we find these search tools? Well, we already talked about the person that's recording the deeds, the mortgages, the judgments is usually going to be the office that keeps the records. In most states, it'll be connected to the clerk, to the recorder's office. And we talked a little bit about before using the same type of tools to find the legal records that we use in finding the assessor records. We can go to the county website and look for the recorder's office or the clerk's office, or we can do a quick Google search using keywords like legal records, court records, liens, deeds, mortgages, and pull up the specific county that way.
Yeah, which also there are sometimes a couple of different types of searches you can do. So, I used to, just think of them all as legal records, but you've got a couple of different kinds of legal records that you have here. You have, and I guess so. It depends. Sometimes when we're looking through, we'll be looking through all the different types of records, including, civil, criminal, traffic tickets and everything. Sometimes it's all included in one, and sometimes they have them separated. Like in this case, where we have, the county here has separated them into what they have, court record searches and official record searches. So they kind of have their deeds and mortgages and everything, separated from, their criminal and civil cases. And so in this case, we would search the official records there, and that's where we would be able to find liens against property.
Yeah, exactly. Like Shade said, sometimes they'll combine them, sometimes they'll separate them. In this case, we have a couple of different ways that we're going to search it. First of all, we're going to search it from the owner's information, from using the owner's name. We talked about that with the assessor records, and that's the reason we're going to use the assessor records to research this property. Once we search the owner's name, we'll usually just go ahead and search the owner's name by itself and try to pull up everything we can against the owner. But let's say that we had an owner that owned a lot of real estate and had a lot of records. Maybe they had 1,000 records, and we've seen this. In fact, we just had this happen this week. In doing research for one of our buying tours where we take students to an auction where there was, literally 1,500, 1,800 records on it. Well, in that case, then we can narrow down that search by searching by the document type. So I was able to search by lien and state lien and federal lien and different categories, and then also search for any releases of those liens. That way, instead of trying to go through 1,800 records, which would be, nearly impossible or take a lot of time to do, I was able to narrow that down and then look for liens that were issued against that particular property.
Yeah, really, what we're trying to do when we're searching through these records is save ourselves time. And so a lot of what we do kind of depends on how much, how many records pull up. If we go and plug the name in there, and we only get back 5 records, then it makes it very easy for us to go through those and to quickly see whether or not there are liens against the property, at least, or if there were any liens that were placed against the property during the time that they owned it. That's one important part about when we're doing those record searches is that, you know, it's one of the reasons why when we're looking at properties, we might need to research and go back multiple owners depending on how they bought it. If they bought it with like a quick claim deed, they could have bought it and it could have had liens against it when they bought it, and you wouldn't know because that's the nature of quick claim deeds. But if it's something like a warranty deed that we come up against, then we know that it was free and clear at the time that it was purchased. And so, at that point, we know that we have one owner that, and that's the only name that we're going to need to search because, when they bought it, it was free and clear.
Yeah, exactly. In fact, that's something that we teach our students how to be able to do is to go through that process and do what we call researching the chain of title. In some circumstances, if it was issued with a warranty deed last, it's going to be a lot more simple than if it's been sold multiple times over the last few years using a quick claim deed. But we're going to do all of that searching from this record search tool, which will pull up all of the records that are attached to that individual name. Sometimes I'll even use the book and page number to pull up deeds or information or see if anything's connected to that specific book and page number. And what the book and page number is kind of the number that's used for the deed. It's like the parcel number for the deed itself. So in the past, they actually used to have books and they would open up book 76 and page 65, and that would be where your deed would be located. They still use that same system, but now instead of having just physical records that you had to go to the county courthouse, most of this stuff's online and available for us to research.